Thank you for coming, and if you're out there in internet land, thanks for joining us as well. My name is Lucas Gilman. I am an adventure photographer and filmmaker, and we're going to talk about kind of my, I guess you could say, progression from a photographer into a filmmaker, but we're also going to talk about backup strategy as well as how to deal with all of these assets that we're going to deal with. And if you stick around till the end, I think there's a pretty good chance we'll be raffling a drive off for the people here in the room. So your odds are pretty good. You picked the right session. We will be raffling off one G Drive Mobile Pro, but I also have one of these new Armor ATDs, which I will be raffling off via my social media. So we will get that information out soon. But I think the best way to start is to kind of show you all the gear that is involved with making these pictures, which is a lot of stuff. It looks kind of overwhelming. We've got motion control, we've got my kid, my dog. Unfortunately, they don't always fit in the bag. But all this stuff can really be pared down to I'd say the most important part of this whole kit, obviously, is capturing these images, but also for my business to run. I'm a freelance photographer, so if I don't have all those ones and zeros backed up and on hard drives, my business isn't a business, because I get paid to make photos and to make videos. And to show you what my office looks like, I thought a video would be interesting to tell that story. So this is something we just produced, and this will show you what my
It's more than a place. It's more than a project. It's about getting out there. It's about telling a story and being better every day. Trust is paramount. Your athletes have to trust you. There are no second chances. That's why you have to trust your gear. You have to push through the early mornings and long days. It will be easy to quit. But in the end, it all comes together to make something meaningful and true.
So that's the office, which doesn't suck. That was Iceland and Tahiti and a bunch of other places. But you're saying that's awesome. You get to go to Iceland, Tahiti, and all these crazy places. But it really starts with an idea. And to kind of illustrate that, I want to share this project some of you may have seen before. I wanted to go out and do something interesting and make really, really big prints. And originally the idea was actually very self-serving, because I technically just wanted to go out and see if I could technically put hundreds of photos together to make something really big and something kind of interesting. So to do stitched prints, which is not a new concept, you need typically a longer lens, medium to telephoto range, and I used for this project a 105-1.4 and a 200 f2. And then you need to find your nodal point. And if you want to find out how to do that, there's probably a 14 or 15-year-old kid on YouTube that could explain it much better than I can. But you find the nodal point of your lens so that basically there's no parallax when you're doing all these stitches. So your lines are straight. And so after you find your nodal point by moving your lens forward and aft, you will then eliminate that parallax. And this is what it looks like. So I've gone in and taken hundreds of photos, basically, of all these different sections. Think of it like a mosaic or a bunch of quadrants. And you want to have, the kind of key takeaway is you want to have about a 30% overlap and or a point of reference so that Photoshop can figure out how to line these images up. From all of these images, another little tip, I don't include it here, but I will usually include my finger in the first frame before I do that, so I know that I'm going this direction. And on the last frame, I'll take a picture of my finger as well, so I know that's the last one, because otherwise you're like, wow, there's 10,000 photos and I don't know how these all go together. So this will give you an idea of like all the photos between my fingers are the ones that are in this sequence. From there, we use a couple different programs. I use Lightroom initially to kind of tone those raw images, give them a real baseline, bring up the contrast, saturation, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, they go into a program called Auto Giga Pano, which is great because it's really the king of stitching programs. It does a lot better than Photoshop, finding all of those corresponding lines. And then it puts all these together. As you can see, all those photos, it puts them together into one image. And this is actually brought into Photoshop here after that. And you can see they're all in layers. And the reason they're all in layers is because then I can go in, and if there's some sort of a weird overlap, I can go in and kind of fix that. One little side note, the reason that, and obviously I'm here speaking for G Technology today, but the faster the drive these hundreds of photos are on that I'm accessing in and out, the quicker I'm able to work. These images, the working file size for this image alone was in the, looks like about 6 gig range, so 6 gigabytes. So this is a lot of data it's pushing back and forth. This is what the Auto Giga Pano actually does when it's stitching. It basically puts these all together, and you can see all these little lines which go away once it is, but it shows you the zones and what it's using in between all of these things. So a very powerful program, but like I said, you can do this in Lightroom or Photoshop as well. This one is just a little more nuanced and gives you a little bit more power to do these things. This is what the final image comes out as. And so the reason I'm using a longer lens, a 105-1.4 in this image particular, and shot at 1.4, as you can see, it falls off really, really fast. So I'm basically making a picture with a lens that doesn't exist, because I've got a wide angle lens that's falling off very, very fast, but I'm also getting the control of the depth of field and that really nice fall off. Here's the zoomed in shot of one of the shots from this, and you can see the detail we're getting from this. So these things can be printed. We actually did a show here at B&H a while back, and we printed them out maybe 80, 90 inches long, and you could walk up and you could see their eyelashes, this close. It was very, very cool. I also took an infrared camera. This is a Nikon D810, which I converted to infrared, and we did the same thing. This is, I think, 120 images put together, and this is the detail that you can see from one of those images. So this is a lot of data. So, coming in with a plan and, having a vision, again, going back to that, it starts with an idea, having a vision for something you want to do. This is one of my first ones. This is in Iceland. He's one of the best boxers to ever come out of Iceland. And as you can see, this beautiful, kind of, whatever mat with it's all burned and everything. Well, the reason that is like this is because I actually screwed up. I forgot to take the picture in the upper left-hand quadrant. So to kind of save it, I made it look artsy, but you also have to remember that if you miss one shot out of this sequence of 100, the whole thing could be ruined. So again, going out and planning something, making something interesting. Same guy here. This is about 80 images. This is 200 images put together. About 80 images. This is 40. This gentleman, and I said originally this project was very self-serving. I just wanted to go out and make these massive prints. And it came to be that each of these people in the project actually had a very interesting story. The working title is Beauty and the Beast. And it sounds very superficial, but the beauty is actually who these people are today, and the beast is what they've overcome. This gentleman here, you can see the hate tattoos all over his body. He actually was the son of the Grand Master of the KKK in Indiana, and he left the KKK about 5 years ago, and I guess you don't leave the KKK. They jumped in the parking lot and they beat him until they thought he was dead. Somebody found him, took him to the hospital, he recovered, and now he has a GoFundMe page. He's covering all of his tattoos one by one, which I guess is very painful and very time consuming. But he also has an outreach group for people that are in gangs as well as in hate groups to try to show them the light and to preach tolerance and hope. So the beauty is who he's become through this process. The beast is what he overcame throughout this entire thing. This is in Mexico. This is my personal Beauty and the Beast. This is an area almost got kidnapped here many years ago by Zapatistas, and I wanted to go back. This is this absolutely beautiful gorge, and it's one of those things where I thought this would be an important thing. So you can see this sequence of images here. We'll see a tight shot of it. Is about 15 images just for this sequence to do this one little, call it a palette in this mosaic. So there's 20 images in this sequence, just, if you think of it like a layer of an onion sandwiched together to show his path as he went down the waterfall. And then obviously this is the overall, which could be printed the size of a building. I haven't found a printer that will print it this big. Obviously we could do them in pieces and do this, but the printing technology is really changing currently, so it'll be exciting to see all of these kinds of things. So, a couple camera tips to get the best out of your camera. Here's some things you can do. First of all, shoot uncompressed. If your camera can shoot 14-bit, shoot 14-bit. 12-bit is about half the colors of 14-bit. So if you can do 14-bit, shoot 14-bit. As well as, just continue to work on your camera techniques. And to get sharper images, couple things. Stop down 2 to 3 stops from your lens's maximum aperture, which means if you have a 2.8 lens, f2.8 means you want to be between 5.6 and f8. And this is just a general rule of thumb, but that is going to be the sharpest or the best performing aperture for your given lens. People think the higher you go, after you get f8, f11, f16 is actually sharper. You actually lose quality because there's more light refracting within the lens and such. So the sharpest your lens will be 2 to 3 stops from maximum aperture. Fast shutter speed. Digital cameras are insanely technical when the data that they record. So a faster shutter speed, the old rule of thumb would be you'd want to be, if say you had a 200 millimeter lens, you'd want to be at 1/250th of a second. I would recommend 3 to 4 times faster than that because they record every detail, especially the more megapixels you have, the more detail it will. And then pick the right zone of focus. And when I say that, we're going to have a little demonstration here that will show you, if you're a landscape photographer, how to get those completely sharp landscapes that you can do. And if you're on tripod, turn off your VR. The VR would actually be working against you unless there's a tripod mode, because it's actually vibrating within the lens to try to rectify any vibration. Some cameras now have focus peaking. This is a great way to be able to make sure that what you think is sharp is sharp. The D850, for instance, has focus peaking, and this is what it will show you when you're in like a manual focus, essentially. It'll show you what you're actually getting in focus. If you don't have that built into your camera, there are other ways to do that. Typically, I would recommend focusing in about 30% into your frame, or about a third of the way into your frame. And that way, if you're at 5.6 or f8, you're going to have everything from that point on be in focus. So when you blow that print up really big, the mountains are sharp, but you also have those foreground elements that are sharp as well. So I really would say, as a photographer, I'm really a generalist. I really like to shoot everything. I love aerial photography. I love cityscapes. I used to travel around 200 days a year. Currently trying to pare that down to more like 100. But I just love going out and making interesting images. This is in Abu Dhabi. This is in Dubai. A little called a snap zoom, so about a 3-second exposure. And we're at, say, 24 millimeters, and at the end of the exposure, you're kind of just zooming out with the lens to give it that blur with the lights. So using some interesting techniques, stitch pano here. This is in Dubai as well. That's the Burj Khalifa, the I guess now the second tallest building in the world. Somebody just beat them with another tall building. Finding interesting angles. Always looking for a rooftop. Helicopters are great if you can afford it, but always looking for a rooftop. And a lot of times it could just be even a rooftop bar. Going up and doing your research, figuring out, do they allow tripods? Well, if they don't allow tripods, maybe they allow a little beanbag or something that you can put on the rail so that you can get that long exposure. But doing that research and figuring out where these things are. Creative white balance. I use a lot of creative white balance. This is shot in tungsten white balance, so you're getting this really nice deep blue in the background, as well as the blue for all the light that is falling, which is natural light. Near my home, Pismo Beach, California. Always looking to frame things, going out at the right time of day. Again, finding unique and interesting angles. I grew up in Colorado, and I started shooting a lot of backcountry skiing, and started covering a lot of adventure sports, as well as I guess you could say team sports and otherwise. I covered the Tour de France 4 times. This is a Tour of California going down through Big Sur. This is a Tour de France. This is a Tour of California here. Barbaro, this is when he won the Kentucky Derby in the most lengths in current history. I'd rather go out and make one image in a day that was something that was memorable and special, as opposed to 20 that were not. I spent all day on the backside of Churchill Downs trying to make this shot. This is a 600 millimeter lens with a 2x converter, so a 1200 millimeter lens, and I wanted to figure out what shutter speed could I keep the heads of the horses sharp and have their hooves moving, because in this you have a feeling of movement, you have a feeling of motion. If they were just stopped, it would be a nice picture, but it wouldn't have that total impact. So I figured out 1/60th of a second with a gimbal and a 600 millimeter lens with a 2x converter, and I spent all day making this picture, which is one that is still memorable and I think is still pretty cool. So again, quality over quantity is something that I strive to do in every day. This is absolute luck. This is the Iron Man. This vignette is actually the smoke from the cannon, and I was lucky that a breeze came up and just blew a little bit of away. I thought I was totally hosed as the Le Mans start for the swim section happened, and all of a sudden I couldn't see anything. I'm like, that was really dumb. I should have known that, and then it just kind of serendipitously happened. Shot a lot of X Games over the years, looking for different angles. Pan blurs. For an adventure photographer, I'm actually afraid of heights, which is kind of a strange thing, but only man-made heights. So I spent all day trying to get, and I was working for ESPN at the time, trying to get on top of this rickety, basically ramp, which is about 100 feet tall and blows about 2 feet in the wind as you're standing up there. And all I could think of as I'm going up is like, the guys that built this were underpaid, underappreciated, and there's probably at least 3 or 4 bolts that didn't get tightened all the way down. But you've got to get the shot. So get up there, and these guys are just like, oh, no big deals. They go down the super pipe and launch themselves into oblivion. But again, you've got to get the shot. I love doing portraits. A lot of what I'm known for is little person, big landscape. But when I get to interact with an athlete or a person in general, it's something that's very rewarding. So. Christian Van de Velde, yeah, good guy. I used to cover the Garmin team for years. Chauncey Billups. This is in Iceland. And sometimes it's just being there. This is just a quiet moment with an athlete in Iceland. We were just out there, and the waves weren't that great. And I was like, are you going to paddle out? And he was like, yeah, I'll go check it out. And I was like, okay, I'll hang out too. And there was just one moment where the light's nice, it has a nice feeling, and you're there. Bria Larson, Olympic swimmer. Bria Larson again. Iceland, little person, big landscape. Ice caves in Iceland. A lot of these are just, my portrait work is just one light. I'll just bring one light. I don't necessarily need to have 6. Sometimes you need them, but this is just one light off camera with a softbox, just lighting him up. As you can see, there's not a lot of light coming from behind him. So I'm basically just filling in the areas that I want to light. You can see on the left, there's no light on those rocks, so I've just, focused that light on him so it's not spilling over.
Were Were you open wide there, or is it like at 4? Or?
It was probably like 5, 6 right there. It was pretty. It was bright daylight right outside the cave there. This is from that gigapixel project. This is actually a dozen photos put together. This is Siggy. She lost 40% of her quadricep to cancer, and she is a competitive open, a free diver, and she dives in some of the coldest water in the world, and really, really inspirational. Some composite work. Love the portraits. One light again, this Disney Concert Hall. This is what I would call the moody blue technique. So that blue light you see in the back is actually natural daylight. I've turned the camera to the tungsten white balance, which is the little light bulb. So everything available light will go blue. And then I put a full tungsten CTO gel or an orange gel over the strobe, so everything that lights is the normal color. So that's just one light in the softbox up high to the left, lighting her head. Again, this is the image that I messed up. Missing that one tile. Skogafoss in Iceland. This is actually one of the first pictures I had published in Sports Illustrated. It was actually the first digital image that they published as a 2-page spread. One light in the back for with a blue gel for the water, and one light with an orange gel in the front.
Was it with a early Nikon camera?
That was with a D1X actually, which was a 6-megapixel camera.
Yeah.
So now we've got all these images. What do we do with them? So for my still images, I shoot both stills and video production work. For my still images, out in the field, I back up everything every day, and the takeaway is that I want everything to be in 3 places at all the time. So depending on what format your camera takes, whether it's SD or CF Express or CFast, in this case the D850 takes an SD card. I will download everything from that SD card to 2 drives every night, because I want to make sure, first of all, I'm getting the images that I want. Second of all, my lens hasn't gotten knocked and I'm getting out of focus images and such. If I'm shooting red, 8K red, everything is being downloaded to G-Speed Shuttle SSD, and that's just for speed. Think of that server as just a big bucket drive. And that thing, I think, is at 2,400 megabytes a second, so I can download everything very fast. And because we're shooting about 1 terabyte a day per red camera when we're out in the field. So it's all about speed and not, making sure we have everything and everything backed up. For my ingest, there's a couple things I like to use. ShotPut Pro 6 is great. You can also use Lightroom, but I was on a shoot the other day and my Digitech actually had a weird thing happen where it wasn't seeing every image on the card. The great thing about ShotPut Pro is it does checksums, which basically it says there's this much data on this card, and it copies over and it says there's exactly the number of bits here and there's exactly the number of bits here. So it goes and makes sure it verifies everything got from here A to B. So that's a great way to do it. But as I said, I grew up in Colorado, the son of a fly fishing guide, and my first sport, and I would recommend if you're looking to improve your photography to go out and find your first sport. It doesn't have to be sports, but it would be anything that would be your first love. Something, and for me this was skiing. I love to ski and I love to be outdoors. So my first sport, whether you're shooting, hockey or portraits or whatever, find your first thing that you're really interested in. For me that was skiing. My dad was a fly fishing guide, and he had this really kind of sick and twisted idea that the colder, wetter, and more miserable it was, the better the fly fishing would be. So as a 6-year-old kid, I would be out there freezing, and I'd be like, "Can we go in, Dad?" And he would say, "No, the misery factor is getting just right." This is actually animated to show you the snow, but this is with a fisheye lens shot in Jackson Hole, which was where I moved after college.
Who's this here?
This is in Jackson Hole. This is Trevor Hyatt. He was a Patagonia athlete for many years. Always looking for contrast, shadow and light. And sometimes when the weather is not good, whether it's raining or snowing, that's the best time, just that pop of color and that blank canvas. Every shot that you will see in my portfolio, I've started from the background first. The background is my canvas. It is my starting point. From there, I interject color or motion or action or reaction, and go on from there. But it doesn't snow year-round, so I needed a second season. I would hopefully you would find something that, you know, whether it was portraits or weddings or whatever else you like to do, that you would find something else in addition to that. Also to diversify your portfolio financially, as well as you know, to have different visual things. For me, that was kayaking. I fell in with a bunch of kayakers, and we started going all over the world, and they were luckily some of the best guys in the world dropping these massive waterfalls. This is the Rio Alsaceca in Mexico. And we just kind of went out, and I fell in love with being out in the jungle, finding these pristine waterfalls that had never been run, and just going out and making interesting pictures every single day. A lot of bushwhacking, a lot of rope skills to get into these positions, a lot of sweaty days. Scott, you've been there. Lots of lugging gear into the middle of nowhere. But again, going out and trying to make the best out of every day. For instance, this waterfall here, using an app called PhotoPills, I was able to figure out the actual time of day that the sun would actually be hitting this waterfall, because they're in a canyon. You go in and it's just dark, dark, dark. Putting yourself in the best situation to succeed will allow you, whether you're shooting buildings or waterfalls, to make the best picture possible. Nick Troutman, Hawaii. This is Rolf Ortiz, Red Bull athlete. This is the second largest waterfall ever run. This is Big Banana Falls in Mexico, in the state of Veracruz. This is in near Jackson Hole, Lower Mesa Falls. Location, location, location. This is Mitlaco Falls, Columbia River Gorge, and this beautiful verdant green here on the left is actually poison oak. Deathly allergic to. So, but you need to get the shot. So I built myself a mini hazmat suit, you know, gaffer taped my pants down, wore gloves, and rappelled down this lip, hoping that we would get just a little bit of sun and we'd go out and make something interesting. And luckily the sun cooperated, and you know, our athlete had just released the paddle, and we made something unique and hopefully kind of memorable. This is just a monopod with a camera on top and a pocket wizard holding it up high over the top, so that I can get that different angle. He's seal launching off of a bridge into a river in Mexico. This is Lower Lewis Falls, the fisheye. This is in Hawaii, when the lava was flowing. These guys wanted to go out and paddle up to the lava. They came back and they said, you know, I don't know if that was the best idea, because I put my hand in the water, it felt like you could boil an egg. And I was like, yeah, what temperature does the plastic in your boat melt? And they're like, no idea. So, and these, you can see these are rocks exploding into the air. When these rocks hit the air or the water, they literally, the air inside trapped explodes, and it's like bombs going off. It's kind of scary. Santo Domingo, Chiapas, Mexico.
Is that a person standing on that cliff?
Yeah, he's filming. And sometimes I like to leave people in there for scale, to give you an idea that this isn't just like a 15-foot drop. This is Lower Mesa Falls in Idaho. Abaco Falls, Pacific Northwest, Mexico. And then one of my favorite shots, and this is where we're going to go back to the background first. This is a naturally occurring phenomenon. These are actually soap bubbles. This is the aptly named Black River in northern Wisconsin. And so basically bark and leaves fall in the water, and they get broken down. They have fatty acids, and they make this naturally occurring soap. And in the slack water, it kind of pools up. And this image was not set up. I was actually photographing waterfalls upstream, and was walking across a bridge and looked down and saw these patterns of soap bubbles, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And starting from the background first, I was like, wow, there's a really cool background. I see the athletes paddling down from the waterfalls where they were going to take out of the bridge, and I'm like, put one and one together, you get two. The athlete is going to float underneath me, so I did a test shot, took three shots as he went under, and all of a sudden made something interesting. The light is the last light of day. There's no strobes or anything involved. It was just lucky that I was there at the right time in the right place. But being able to see that, and starting with that background first, all of a sudden you're able to go out and make an interesting or new picture.
Is she with any indie filters or variable indie on the...
Nope, that's just straight out, no Photoshop at all on that. That's straight out of the camera. And then I got asked to do the largest waterfall ever run. This is 189 feet. This is Rafa Ortiz again, Red Bull athlete, great guy. And it may be hard to see, but there's one little guy there. And 189 feet is a long way to go. I don't think the body is supposed to travel off of a 189-foot cliff. So I set up 3 cameras. I actually didn't hold a single one. I had them all wired together because I was actually worried if I was looking through the viewfinder that I was going to miss the shot, because I've known Rafa for many years, and I was worried that I was going to have to be the one that would call his parents and say, you know, Rafa didn't make it. So I said right before he was going to paddle over there, I said, Rafa, no Kodak courage. If you don't feel like going, we can just jump in the car and take off. And he's like, no, I'm good. And it was this big Red Bull shoot, so we had a Cineflex helicopter, which was late, so all of a sudden Rafa disappears, and we're like, did Rafa leave? And they're like, no, he's taking a nap on the other bank. He said he's just wake him up when the helicopter gets here. So he paddles in. I get literally 2 frames from each camera where he's on the lip here, and then he's engulfed in water. He was down under the water for about a minute and a half. Just like, this is 20,000 CFS pummeling over this cliff, which is a lot of water. And so he finally pops up. He got ripped out of his boat, and he's got a cut over his eye, and he's minorly concussed. And I'm like, Rafa, what was it like? And he's like, it was kind of like being in a washing machine. I was like, totally get it, And he's like, and then roll it down a hill. I was like, wow. Little side note, in kayaking, if you swim or you get pulled out of your boat, it's mandatory that you drink a beer out of your own boot right after you do that. So not only did he go off a 189-foot waterfall, get a minor concussion, he had to drink a beer out of a slimy, dirty boot. So for the video stuff, as I mentioned before, when we're shooting red, 8K red specifically, and that's like a terabyte a day, we want to have everything backed up in at least 3 places. And the original would be on the red card, and for the stills it would be on the SD card. And so when I say 3 places, it would be an original, which would be the original place it was captured, and then 2 other places besides that. So again, 3 copies of everything. The stills, they go from that original master, which would be the SD card, to these new armor drives, which are really cool, pure waterproof, shockproof. You can drive a car over them, I've heard. I haven't done it myself. But again, 3 places. And I'm not worried about the drives having issues. I'm more worried about leaving a bag somewhere in a restaurant and having all the data in one place, not all your eggs in one basket, essentially. So basically, geographically separating it, whether you're in the field or when you're back in the office, is kind of the MO for that. When we get back to the office, everything goes from those smaller drives, which we backed up everything into the field, through obviously a computer, and then they go to bigger drives, and I'm currently using the Studio XLs, which I think are 72 terabyte units right now currently. And those are set up in either a RAID 5 or a RAID 10 configuration, depending on if I'm doing video applications or stills applications, because some things I'm worried more about speed and some things I'm worried more about redundancy. From there, there's a couple of things I use as far as you're only as good as your technology. There's a couple programs which allow me to not have to think about backing things up. ChronoSync's a very easy one, which will do automatic backups, whether you're just plugging in a drive. You say, every time I plug this in, I want everything from point A to point B to be backed up, or just the new stuff to be backed up. Or there's Hedge, which if you're doing a lot of data, moving terabytes and terabytes, they have a multi-thread kind of thing where it moves things faster, essentially. So I moved to California from Colorado and found a new sport, or a third sport, which is surfing for me. Originally went out to Big Sur a lot. This is in Big Sur. And just really fell in love with the culture of surfing and being outside and being near the water. And so I found my third sport. And then I started going to Hawaii, and I started going to Tahiti and kind of chasing big waves, but also remembering my roots, which were going to Iceland, and started putting together surf expeditions to Iceland. This is in the Iceberg Lagoon there in Iceland. And started working with some kind of interesting clients. This is for Land Rover. you wouldn't think of Land Rover as a surf brand, but I pitched them an idea of going and doing a trip, basically. I said, you give us a car, give us some budget, we'll take a couple athletes, and we'll come away with a story from all of these things. So I guess the takeaway from that would be always thinking outside the box, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an endemic brand to pitch something to, because there's a lot of crossover, especially in the lifestyle. This is at Mavericks, California.
Were you in the water?
I was in a boat, very scary boat there, which our boat actually got hit by a wave that day and almost capsized. So that's a story for another time. But yeah, and then started doing a little bit of lighting. This is actually lit with, I've got 10 lights behind him lighting up the water here to give it that nice pop. This is Kai Lenny, Jaws, the second largest swell in the last 10 years. A helicopter, Big Sur. So I used to shoot water, whether and or snow, really, really fast or really, really slow. So this is actually a 10-second exposure. So the water is, you get that really milky ethereal look. And or if I'm shooting fast, when I say fast, I mean like 3,000th of a second or faster to freeze every single water droplet. Backdoor pipeline, Hawaii North Shore, back near my house, backyard in California. This guy did not have a good day. This is at Jaws, Big Sur, California. Jaws, Davenport, California. Pipeline.
In a helicopter there? Or?
In a helicopter, yeah. This is the largest wave. This is in the Guinness Book of World Records. This is Aaron Gold, and this is the largest wave ever paddled into. They measured it over 80 feet. It might have been broken recently, but there are larger waves that have been ridden, but those are towed in on jet skis and things. So you can see, I left the helicopter in for kind of a reference point. That's Dan, the famous yellow helicopter you always see at Jaws there on Maui. Iceland, Jaws, Rush Hour in Hawaii. It's crazy how you're like, how many people are vying for these waves? Little technique tip here, shooting sunset. This is actually set on a fluorescent white balance. Fluorescent lights are generally green, so when you put it on fluorescent mode, it adds red to the image. He's not red because I've got a flash with green gel so that cancels out the red, so he's actually lit the proper color. California coast, Iceland, the dunes near Pismo Beach. This is in Brazil. I was actually there shooting another project and saw the swell was going to be pretty good. Surfing is an interesting thing culturally. There's a lot of places that they don't want you to take pictures because you post them on Instagram, they're geotagged, and all of a sudden there's more surfers there and their local surf break is destroyed. So I was in just outside Rio, and on this point, and I saw this, this happening. I'm taking these pictures, and this guy sees me, and he runs over to me, and I don't speak a word of Brazilian Portuguese, and he's like, oh, and I'm like, sorry, I don't speak Portuguese. And he thought that if he spoke louder and faster, I would totally get what he was trying to do. And I kind of figured out through hand signals, he just wanted a print because this is the best wave. So he came over and he brought a pen, and I wrote my email address on his arm, and he gave me yeah, we're good. And I got an email, said, please send photo of best wave of life. So I sent him, I was like, obviously Google Translate. So I sent him a picture, and he said, thank you, much love from Brazil. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, the guy was stoked. Always looking for foreground elements as well. Trying to bring the viewer in as quickly as possible into the scene, whether that's by having nothing in the scene and then having something that's interesting, or having elements which kind of draw you in, whether that's a framing element or a foreground element. These are shards of the icebergs in Iceland on the beach.
You're all shot with this 600mm lens?
That was with a 70-200 right there, just for compression.
Mm-hmm.
This is with a 70-200. This is Mavericks again. Little cheat here. If you want your sunset to be really, really beautifully saturated and very colorful. If you go to the K setting on your white balance, the Kelvin setting, and you put that to 10,000, that is the warmest white balance your camera can technically do. So it will make that pretty nice sunset all of a sudden be very, very warm. So that was done on this photo. Some stars, Milky Way, Big Sur, California, using that framing element to kind of draw you in here. Some sequences, Big Sur, always looking for shadows to create drama. Going out at the right time of day, right after sunrise, right before sunset.
Is that a natural vignette in that photo?
Yeah. It's just like the last light of day there. Iceland. Just cruising down the icebergs on my way to my local surf break. Iceland. Hawaii. That's Koa Rothman winning the Hui Backdoor Challenge on the North Shore pipeline. Iceland. Foreground elements. And sometimes you get an idea. So I'm shooting this picture. What you don't see in this image are the 85 other photographers who are standing right in front of this, all shooting the exact same shot. I mean, the camera out of the box, I don't care what brand you shoot, is really good, right? It's sharp, it's well exposed, it makes a really nice picture. How do we separate ourselves as a photographer? We go out and we think of either a different angle or a different idea or a different shutter speed. So we're all getting the same picture, pipeline's firing, we're all getting the exact same picture over and over and over. So I said, you know what? My friend works at a helicopter training school. I said, let me give him a call, and I said, can we get an hour at sunset? And so he said, yes, but there is a problem. He goes, I can give you exactly an hour because the Robinson 44 needs to go in for its 10,000 hour service. I'm like, 10,000 hour service, which I know because I've flown a lot of Robinson 44s. At 10,000 hours, they service the rotor because it breaks. I'm like, we're pushing the envelope here, but I really want the shot. So we went up and we got 1 hour and made this shot of pipeline, which is one of the more unique shots that I've ever seen of pipeline. At sunset, beautiful light, that's all natural. That's the sun raking across the mist there. Sold for a bunch of covers and things, but obviously very different from this shot, which everybody else and their brother was getting, to a completely different angle and a completely different feel. Iceland. So, to improve our photography, first of all, my mantra is to do things others aren't willing to do. That's either getting up early, staying out later, working harder. And for my business personally, it's a lot of in-person meetings, whether you're meeting with athletes or clients. I feel like everybody now with Instagram, we're all like rats on crack. Our attention span is literally like as fast as you can scroll. So if you can get somebody down and talk person to person for a couple minutes, you will be a better photographer, do more interesting, more fulfilling projects, work harder, be memorable, be friendly, be a good person, and hold yourself accountable. Don't do something or pitch something you can't do, because if they say, yeah, let's do it, you only have that one chance to make that first impression and to do it the right way. So hold yourself accountable and make sure that you're, crawling before you're walking, walking before you're running, and if you get that Super Bowl, assignment, that you're ready to go out and photograph the Super Bowl. So put the time in. Goals, a lot of goals. Do something every day, even if it's wrong, because even going out and practicing a camera technique that doesn't work, at least you know that when you are out there on that shoot, that it doesn't work and you don't waste the time doing that. So going out and practicing the craft, because even if you're like, well, this obviously doesn't work in this situation, that's a bigger bonus than maybe going and doing the same thing you always do, because all of a sudden you've thought outside that box. And don't set your goals too low. Go out and try to improve your craft. I try to set a weekly goal, something that I want to accomplish that week, whether it's I do a lot of editing in the video side as well, whether it's learning a new technique in video editing or, going out and practicing a new lighting technique, setting a monthly goal, as well as setting a yearly goal, and then a 5-year plan. How all these little things go into, what is that? I want to be the best portrait photographer in the world. I want to be the best, sports photographer in my area. I want to start photographing big waves. Whatever that is for you, setting that plan, and don't be afraid to fail are some important things. I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Chance favors only prepared minds. So I think that really sums it up as far as going out, having a goal, having an idea, and working through that process to make something meaningful and different. And if you want to find me, pretty easy to find me on any of those social media platforms. I try to not overdo it, but also try to provide as much inspiration as well as technical know-how as I can. But thank you guys for coming.